Bonsoir à toutes et à tous. Je suis Francesco Garutti, directeur associé des programmes au CCA, et je suis très heureux de vous présenter ce soir l'exposition Note du site, la photographie dans les premières années de voyage d'Arthur Erickson, organisée par le commissaire David Covo. J'aimerais commencer par remercier toutes les personnes qui ont travaillé à la consolidation et la production de ce projet, toutes les équipes de conservation, de concessions numériques, de production et de scénographie du CCA, et bien sûr David Covo et l'Université McGill à Montréal. J'aimerais également remercier la famille pour avoir donné l'archive de l'architecte Erickson au CCA, et aussi remercier la Fondation Arthur Erickson pour leur soutien constant à cette exposition qui explore un aspect spécifique de la vie et des pratiques d'une des figures les plus importantes et les plus influentes de l'architecture canadienne du siècle dernier. À l'occasion du 100e anniversaire de sa naissance, l'exposition souligne son approche de la recherche et de l'investigation du site. Before getting deeper into the content of the evening, I want to recognize the long-standing connection of Indigenous people to Ondiaga and Munyang, Montreal, in particular the Kanien'kehá:ka people of Kanawake, Kanesetake, and Akevezazne, whose ancestors, along with those of Wendat, Anishinaabe, and Abenaki, lived here long before arrival of the settlers. Still today, the island is home of many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. These communities continue to face challenges to their rights and erosion of their traditional territories as a result of an ongoing process of settler colonialism. The CCA itself puts on exhibitions, events, maintains its collection, and publishes texts on these lands that have never been ceded by their indigenous inhabitants. The CCA therefore recognizes its settler colonial roots, and we are committed to foster affirmative relationship with the indigenous people across Tiohtià:ke, Munyang, Montreal, and beyond. We invite you to learn more about the CCA ongoing commitment to our living land acknowledgement process by visiting our website and contacting us directly and seeking, in our galleries, traces of the projects connected to it. So before passing the word to the curator of the exhibition we are presenting tonight, David Covo, I would love just to spend a few words framing also the process that brought us tonight to focus on this project. Last year, the CCA initiated a long-term investigation plan to try to understand the complex and rich relationship among image-making practices and the built environment. A program which is including exhibitions, editorial activities, conferences, and seminars as form of live research focused to reflect and questions today the role of a photo collection as the one of the CCA as a research tool. Following a large exhibition on the present and the future of our collection, Lives of Documents, on display in 2023, and researches and studies on the popular use of photography on the construction site with the projects such as Math Skills in 2024, tonight, with being there, the focus of our study goes to the photographic medium as a form of note-taking, a tool for exploration by the architect, an instrument to learn how to design, a mode of seeing and telling stories about space. A large selection of the objects in this exhibition are part, of course, of the Arthur Erickson Fund here held at the CCA. The first donation of the archives by Arthur Erickson dates back to 1987, with additional gifts received between 1989 and 2004. More recently, in 2010 and 2013, donation of archival material were made by the Erickson family. So, all the images, the annotations, the letters, the short stories selected by David Covo for this exhibition can be really read as part of an informal travel diary assembled by Arthur Erickson himself. An architect who has since his early age believed in the experience of the place as the only unique possible way to approach design. So, I would love to really thank David Covo for all the time spent together and the work done in our project room in these months. with all the CCA teams and also remotely with the graphic designer who's been working on this exhibition, Sean Yandris. Now, I'd love to introduce David and kind of welcome him here on stage. David Kovo is Associate Professor and Past Director of the School of Architecture at McGill University, where he has taught since 1977. He currently teaches design, architectural drawing, and traditional architectural sketching. In the summer of 1976, he worked with John Schreiber, Eva Vexay, and Yasmin Lari Architects in Pakistan, and he has since 1977 maintained a consulting practice. He was elected to the RICA College of Fellows in 1998 and was appointed Professor of Honoris Causa by Ion Minco University of Architecture and Urbanism in Bucharest in 2015. His research activities have addressed the drawing and the design process, building science, universal design, and housing. Current research addresses the architecture of the McGill University campus, the design history of the McGill College Avenue in Montreal, and the architecture of Arthur Erickson. He is president of the board of the directors of the Arthur Erickson Foundation in Vancouver. Please join me in welcoming on stage David Kovo.
Grazie, Francesco. Good evening, bonsoir, mesdames et messieurs. Welcome to being there. Thank you for being here this evening. I'm going to start the presentation straight away. Just give me a second. I'm going to come back to this image in a few minutes, but I'm going to go ahead to this image, and I'm going to use this image really as the first slide of the presentation this evening. There are many characters in the story that I'm going to tell this evening on behalf of the curatorial team, but these three in the image here are central. In the middle, Myrtle Chatterson Erickson, Arthur Erickson's mother. On the left, Professor Gordon Weber from the School of Architecture at McGill, and on the right, of course, Arthur Erickson. That photo was taken on the campus of McGill University in the spring of 1950, on the day of Erickson's graduation ceremony in architecture. I'll say a few words about each of the three characters. Myrtle Chatterson Erickson, 1894 to 1979, Arthur's mom, was the most important of three people he always referred to as major influences in his life. Multi-talented, engaged as both an art teacher and an artist, Myrtle encouraged Arthur's experiments with painting and showed his work to her friend, at one point, Canadian painter Lauren Harris. Harris's unexpected recognition of the promise in the early paintings of Erickson's was immediate and transformative for the 16-year-old Erickson, who would later refer to Harris as the second major influence in his life and career. Gordon McKinley Weber, on the left, a celebrated Canadian artist who taught basic design in McGill School of Architecture for 22 years, was cited by Erickson as the third of the three major influences in his life. A popular and adventurous, occasionally unorthodox teacher, Weber kindled Erickson's interest in the nature of materials and also what he characterized as his openness to new ideas. Erickson once said, "I don't think that I would be as receptive to everything as I am without Gordon Weber." As teacher and student, and later as colleagues, the two maintained a lively and intellectually rewarding friendship that endured until Weber's death in 1965. Arthur Erickson had wanted to be a painter since he was about 13 years old. He often talked about the soirees that he attended as a teenager with his mother at the Vancouver home of Lauren Harris. This image and the two that follow are photographs of some of Erickson's early paintings. I took these photographs on a visit to the family on Bowen Island a few months ago in the summer of 2024. They're all currently in storage in the Erickson family archives. This one, I think, was particularly striking and one of the favorites of the 20 or 25 that I saw. Here's another one. In 1942, still interested in painting, Arthur entered the first year of the Applied Science program at UBC, surprisingly on the advice of his father, Oscar, who was a talented artist himself. But the world was at war, and a few months later, still in first year, Arthur enlisted in the army, found himself enrolled in an intensive Japanese language course, commissioned as an officer, and a few months later, working in intelligence in India. He was eventually transferred to Malaya and was in fact on his way there when the war ended. Discharged with the rank of captain, he returned to Vancouver and resumed his studies at UBC in the summer of 1946. One change: he's now considering a career in the Foreign Service, probably as a result of his experience during the war. But his life changed, as most of you in this room know, when a friend of his mother's gave him a copy of the August 1946 issue of Fortune magazine with the first color photographs of Frank Lloyd Wright's house and studio at Taliesin West. The rest is history, at least for those of us who are architects. He moved quickly. He wrote immediately to several of the Canadian schools of architecture in Canada, and a few months later found himself in the second year program at the McGill University School of Architecture. According to his classmates and his teachers, Erickson, that's him at the upper right, was a brilliant student with what Professor Stuart Wilson described, and I'm quoting, as a knack of arriving in the nick of time with well-developed and striking design projects. John Bland, front row center, an accomplished and award-winning architect planner and one of Canada's most distinguished architectural educators, and another one of the characters in this story, taught in the McGill School from 1939 to 1978. As director of the school between 1941 and 1972, he was responsible for accepting Erickson into the program in 1946, and he quickly recognized Erickson's prodigious talent. Bland followed Erickson's studies and early years in the profession with considerable interest, and he continued to support him as his career evolved. In this image, from the McGill files, he appears to be visiting an exhibition of recent work by Gordon Weber's students in the course in basic design that he taught for many years. So no one was surprised, least of all Bland and Weber, when Erickson graduated in the spring of 1950 with all of the top prizes, including the Hugh McLennan Memorial Scholarship, a travel award worth $1,500, that's a lot of money in 1950, that he combined with his veteran's allowance and income from part-time work to support approximately 2.5 years of travel in North Africa, the Middle East, and Europe. On the screen are two photographs by Gordon Weber, in fact, both of Erickson and a classmate and close friend, Guy Deborah. They're in Arles on the left and Carcassonne on the right. Throughout his life, Erickson acknowledged this period in his life, these 2.5 years on the road, as transformative. The letters, photographs, and other materials that he used to document this trip, his first trip, reflect an itinerary that was originally shaped by his studies, but frequently and cheerfully adjusted when he encountered opportunities for improvisation. The one sour note he reported in a letter to John Bland in 1950 was when he lost his Jacob Burckhardt history of architecture text somewhere in Egypt on one of his first stops. He found a replacement, but it was in 2 volumes, and it took up half of his knapsack. His discoveries on these travels confirmed the value of direct experience and the privilege of time on site for observation and contemplation, an approach to learning that would shape his next trip to Japan and Southeast Asia in 1961 and all of his later travels. The trip to Japan and Southeast Asia in 1961, which was supported with a senior fellowship, a travel grant from the Canada Council, generated another enormous collection of photographs and more than 25,000 words in the correspondence over a period of less than 5 months. Erickson apparently did not keep a travel journal, a formal journal, but the 2.5 years in North Africa, the Middle East, and Europe, and the 5 months in Asia are all eloquently documented in the thousands of photographs that he took and in the dozens of letters that he sent to family, friends, and former teachers. Although excerpts from the letters and some of the photographs have been published over the years with commentary and annotation, there has been no comprehensive critical assessment of the correspondence and its impact on Erickson's life and work. This exhibition, being there, was conceived, as Francesco shared with us earlier, as a first step in a much larger study of Erickson's travel correspondence, photography, and lifelong belief in the value of experience. It's largely based on the 61 travels, this exhibition, and his correspondence with his parents in Gordon Weber, with some reference to the earlier voyages as an exercise in contextualization. The exhibition connects Erickson's intentions and intuition regarding the Asian travels to ideas emerging already in his early houses, and it examines the impact of the discoveries and the insights gained on his later life in built work, writings, and public presentations. The exhibition is also the last, or almost the last, in a series of events taking place across the country in celebration of the 100th anniversary of Erickson's birth in 1924. In 1960, Erickson applies for a senior arts fellowship from the Canada Council to support what can only be described as a meticulously researched program of travel and study in Japan. His application is convincing. The focus is on Japanese art and architecture and the value of the lessons learned to a teacher architect himself, whose interest, like an artist, is in the creative process and the perfection of the artwork. That's a quotation from the application. Drawing heavily from his earlier travels, he argues that what he seeks cannot be understood from writings or photographs, and therefore requires, and I'm quoting again, prolonged study on the site itself. Erickson targets three aspects of Japanese architecture that he finds absent in Western architecture: the mastery with which inside and outside space are subtly manipulated, the reverence for sight that he had encountered only in ancient Greece, and the harmony between form, climate, and light that ground a building in its natural context. He reinforces the importance of what was already a defining element of his own work, the integration of building and landscape, with a very clever reference to an article about the Filberg House that he had just published in Canadian Art, where he observes that the art of siting, and I'm quoting again, in Japanese domestic architecture is missing in contemporary North American practice. At a time when the 4-year-old Canada Council was focused for the most part on the visual arts, music, and theater, Erickson's concluding plea, this is the conclusion of the actual application to the Canada Council. The concluding plea is that architecture be recognized as a fine art, and the plea stands out as a powerful call for action. This document is on the wall in the exhibition, and it makes for a very interesting read. John Bland's letter of reference is also very interesting. He writes, Arthur Erickson is one of the most able graduates that we have had. He did extraordinarily well as a student, and since graduation, he has continued to develop both as an architect and as a remarkably good teacher. Of the young people I know in this field, he is unquestionably the most deserving. And then he adds, and to someone who, like some of you in the room, write 30 or 40 reference letters at this time every year, he adds, I do not know what he plans to do in Japan, but I am sure he has the intelligence and sensitivity to explore fully the mysterious character of Japanese art and architecture. He goes on in the letter to say, if you want a more substantive comment, please get in touch with me and I'll give you one. The Canada Council's arts supervisor, Peter Dwyer, acknowledges Bland's letter of reference with an equally interesting observation. He says, I was interested in what you had to say as I have seen some photographs of a beautiful house he designed at Comox on Vancouver Island. In other words, Erickson's very clever insertion into the application of a reference to the article in Canadian Art worked. And I don't know if the jury saw the reference, but certainly some of the senior administrators of the Canada Council saw the reference and appreciated it. And this is the house, of course, in question. It's the Filberg House, 1958, which deserves a whole other exhibition on its own. Erickson's letters from Japan and Southeast Asia can be divided into different categories, two big categories. The more personal letters were sent directly to friends and colleagues, but the 10 letters that Laura Aparicio and the rest of our team would define as constituting the lucid narrative of the travel diary in Asia were addressed to his parents, Myrtle and Oscar. Myrtle transcribed the letters and would then forward carbon copies of the transcriptions, typewritten, to Gordon Weber and any other recipients named by Arthur in this extraordinary chain. Our assumption that it was Myrtle who transcribed the letters, intended for Weber and others, was never confirmed until it was confirmed in a very unexpected way by one of our curatorial interns. While sifting through the hundreds of maps and travel guides in the CCA archives, in this case from the 1950-52 travels, one of the team opened a small pocket guide to Oslo, and a folded letter slipped out onto the table. It was addressed to Arthur in London, and it had been sent from a woman named Isabella C. McLennan, whose family had actually endowed the traveling scholarship that enabled those transformative 2.5 years. There were other conditions associated with the scholarship, one of which was official, one was unofficial. The official was a report in sketches and or photographs to follow, and the unofficial one was tea with Isabella before the winner of the award departed on their trip. In her tender note to Erickson, she thanks him for sending her such a rich account of his travels to date. So clearly, some of the letters he had sent home were forwarded to her, or he may have sent them directly. And she adds, and this is what confirmed it for us and for the family as well, vis-a-vis the transcription, she adds, the task of deciphering and typing your letters was indeed a labor for your mother. So that clinched it. The 10 letters from Japan and Southeast Asia, the Weber correspondence, amounts to the equivalent of more than 100 double-spaced typewritten pages, and form what may have been, and it's a presumption, the first draft of a comprehensive report to the Canada Council. However, there is no record of any such report ever having been made, and none of the originals of those letters have been found. The files in the John Bland Canadian Architecture Collection at McGill include only 8 letters addressed to Weber, carbon copies of Myrtle transcriptions. I was going to say original carbons, but that doesn't make a lot of sense. Appended to the letters is this note on the screen from Professor Stuart Wilson, suggesting that there is one letter missing, the first letter from Kyoto. In fact, we learn later, and I'll explain why or how later. In fact, there were 2 letters missing, both from Kyoto, and they're interesting to us for several reasons. Both were recovered from the Erickson family archives. We don't know why they were not included with the letters in the archives at McGill. The second very interesting aspect of those 2 letters is that in these first 2 letters, Erickson is very clearly trying to work something out. It's an idea that he has about the nature and importance of what he refers to as the line in Japanese architecture, the line of the pine branch as it lifts like the temple roof at the end, the line of paving stones that don't take you directly to an entrance. And the third, and for the archivists, possibly the most important discovery in those 2 notes, those 2 letters, is that both of the copies that came from the family, i.e. from Vancouver, are decorated with Erickson's own handwritten markups and detailed instructions to his office secretary, Lillian Katola, for editing and retyping. You see a lot of the double P for paragraph, X's, take this out, and then a note saying, no, Lillian, leave it in. So clearly something was happening. So whether or not the letters, the Weber correspondence, those letters, were ever compiled in a single document, it is clear to us, it became clear to us, that they provided essential source material for the public talks, articles, and monographs that Erickson authored on his return to Canada, within months of his return to Canada, and in the years that followed. One of the major outcomes of the work to put this show together, it's fair to say, has been the opportunity to consolidate, once and for all, a comprehensive index of all of the correspondence with details of content and archival location, which we'll share, of course, with everybody else. I should also clarify that the 10 letters sent to Weber were not the only letters sent from Japan. The McGill archives include one original typewritten transcription of a more personal letter from Erickson to Weber, sent from Nara on May 17, 1961, very close to the beginning of the trip. The letter opens in an interesting way, and I'm quoting again, Poor legs, poor hips, poor back, exclamation mark. 1 week of living on the floor is more than an old body can adjust to. Old. He was, 26 at the time? And I'm in the desperate position of never being able to sit with legs hanging and back supported, except in buses or trains where the backs are at right angles to the seats. Close quote. The family archives also include an interesting letter from Erickson to his friends, Bert and Jesse Binnings, who had visited Japan just 2 years earlier and who may have very likely encouraged Arthur to go there himself. There is also at least one letter to a client, and this is one of the documents that interested me very much. The client was Colonel Henry Dyed, a Montrealer who was building an extraordinary summer house for his wife and himself on a magnificent site just outside Edmonton that is now part of the University of Alberta campus. The Dyed House, which was starting construction, just starting construction, I'm not sure if ground had been broken yet, when Erickson was in Japan, was very much on his mind as he explored the gardens and tea houses of Kyoto. So on June 24th, 1961, he writes to his client, Dyed, to express his concerns about materials, finishes, and colors. He asks Colonel Dyed, and I'm quoting, leave any painting or wood finishing until his return. And he adds, to make his point, I'm quoting again, Japan has certainly reinforced my respect for unpainted and unfinished surfaces. We make great mistakes, he said, in our use of preservatives. And he closes with, no interpretation that I have read and no photographs prepared me for Japan. And here, in case some of you are wondering about Erickson's own handwriting, are the first and last pages of the 5-page letter Erickson sent to John Bland from Siena after he had been on the road for 5 months. The letter is undated, but it was likely sent in December 1950, and Erickson confirms the location in the note when he writes, I am now in that most aristocratic of all cities, Siena. The word circled at the lower left of the screen is one that John Bland and I transcribe differently. Free glass of wine to anyone who can guess it. Any guesses what it says? Yeah, crooks. Okay, that's it. No more guesses. we got limited supplies of wine. Crooks is what I came up with, and crooks is what a very quick survey of people coming to the auditorium tonight also confirms. John Bland transcribed it as works, which actually makes a lot more sense. Crook is a verb that I don't think a single person in the room has ever used in a sentence. Erickson and Bland enjoyed a long and mutually rewarding friendship. In this letter to Bland in June 1954, and this is in the McGill archives, Erickson writes a short note about the International Calvaire or Calvert House competition for the Canadian Home of Tomorrow. Gio Ponti was the chair of the jury, and John Bland was the professional advisor. Erickson writes, and this is a short note, Erickson writes, I am writing to ask for the return of my entry, if it's not already too late. Because, as is customary, I was very rushed and made no record of the design. Familiar to anyone? As a matter of fact, it was finished at the airport just before the midnight deadline. Jeffrey Massey and myself added the color on a baggage trolley surrounded by newborn chickens and flowers that were coming in for the Easter weekend. I think the plea fell on deaf ears, and I don't think the drawings were ever recovered. But Erickson then adds in the red box, and I don't think anybody can read that, he adds, and this was very interesting to me, he says, I'm now more or less on my own, at the moment concentrating on houses and doing my own contracting at the same time. The only way I feel that the necessary control over work can be realized. It is just the beginning, but by this summer, there will be 3 new houses and a reputation made or lost. We can talk about which houses those were later. Where is all this material now? Francesco gave us a glimpse in his introduction. The architectural work is distributed in 3 archives. The Canadian Architectural Archives at the University of Calgary, the John Bland Canadian Architecture Collection at McGill, and here at the CCA. The CCA holds most of the architectural work and a considerable collection of photography, including photography from the early 50s. And Simon Fraser University holds a collection of films, But a major portion of the photographic material remains with the Erickson family, some of which is on loan and part of this show. Copies of the correspondence and some originals are found in all three of the major archival collections, Calgary, McGill, and the CCA, as well as the University of Manitoba. That was an exercise in 1972 where an archivist there collected as much as she could about Erickson for a particular project they had undertaken. But once again, the most comprehensive collection of the correspondence is in the family collection. The box on the right was borrowed from the Erickson family collection just a couple of months ago. If you look carefully, you will see a note in Erickson's handwriting at the top right-hand corner of the metal box on the right. Click there. You probably can't read the label, but in Erickson's hand it says best. This was important to us. We had noticed after the first few weeks, going through what Francesco described as dozens of large boxes filled with 2 1/4 negatives and slides. After a few weeks going through that collection, we became more and more convinced that the images that Erickson was using or used for his lectures and public talks were actually not in the batch of material that he first sent to the CCA in 1987. Understandably, he kept it because he was using it on a regular basis. He was also using it for his publications. We were delighted to find, with Jeffrey Erickson's very knowledgeable assistance, what we believe are the images that Erickson had identified for his presentations and publications. Another example of some of the material that we went through in that first review of the slides here at the CCA. What's interesting about these, and some of these you will see in the show, some are labeled, many are not. And here I owe a great deal of thanks to the curatorial team who taught me how to Google search an image and come back with a reasonably plausible list of possible locations. This is a bit of a disappointment for me. These are the only 2 sketches that we found in the CCA's Erickson foam. There may be more. They may be inserted, as we expected they would be, in a map somewhere or in a book. We were hoping to find much more. These 2 pencil drawings, both from the 50 to 52 travels, share what I can only characterize as an extraordinary reading of the integration of building and landscape in both subjects. One of them, I think, may be in Italy. I'm not sure about the other one. Maybe Greece. We don't know. We don't know for sure. We tried the Google search and it was not conclusive. The drawings are astounding to me. The merging of building and landscape, the strategy that he uses to render the topography, especially in the drawing on the right, to me they're breathtaking. And the disappointment that we couldn't find more of them, even more exaggerated. With the exception of a few site plans of Japanese temple compounds sketched on the blank pages in travel documents, Erickson's site notes were for the most part handwritten in improvised notebooks that were produced by folding a sheet of paper twice to make an 8-page pocket-sized mini journal. Do you know what I mean by that? I'm sure, Ron Williams, I'm sure you've done this. You take a blank piece of paper like this, fold it once, and you fold it twice, and you now have an 8-page pocket notebook. We scanned many of these documents like this and had a lot of fun trying to figure out if page 1 was here, where would page 2 be in that sort of sequence of folding. And here's another example. Here's a couple of examples here. So on the left is one of those improvised folded notebooks from Japan. A lot of it is a glossary, English-Japanese. Erickson spoke some Japanese, but the Japanese that he learned during the war and had an opportunity to practice a little bit, maybe just after the war, had pretty much vanished. I think on the Canada Council application, when it asked for other languages, and you can see this on the wall, he said Japanese, comma, with practice, which is what I would have done in his shoes as well. The one on the right is interesting. The one on the right is our field notes from a site visit to the Dyed House just outside Edmonton on the University of Alberta campus. And we included the two of them side by side just to, for Erickson, it was an expedience. And the technique of folding twice to generate the 8-page notebook served him just as well in his practice as it did in his travels. Erickson's minimalist verbal notes have to be read with the extensive visual diary, the photographs, which are stunning. And most of which were taken with a Mamiya Flex 2 twin-lens reflex camera that he acquired in Tokyo, along with a Sekonic handheld light meter. The C2, illustrated here, I found this catalog for that camera online, and we found the receipt for the camera in the CCA archives. The C2 was a professional camera with unusual at that time, interchangeable lenses. It produced black and white and color negatives and transparencies, slides, in a square 2¼ by 2¼ or 6 by 6 centimeter format. These are large negatives that enable enlargement and dramatic editing in the darkroom. Erickson was not a professional photographer, but he used the instrument with an artist's eye for color, light, and composition, and an architect's attention to narrative and context. This is page 2 of the manual. It's important to consider, just for a minute or two, the differences between Erickson's camera and the cameras that most of us now use. Well, for most of us in the room, it's probably a phone, but I'm sure there's maybe a third of the crowd that still uses digital but single-lens reflex cameras. For some of us, the single-lens reflex 35mm camera was our introduction to photography. In my case, it was my father's reflex camera from the Second World War. Not a twin lens, but a single lens reflex. But it otherwise operated in a very similar way. The cameras that we started with had light meters that were built in, and we aimed the camera by looking through the lens directly at the subject. With the Mamiya and any other twin lens reflex camera, the lower lens projects the image directly onto the film, and the upper lens projects the image onto a mirror and up to a ground glass screen shielded by a little pop-up box. In other words, the photographer sees a projection, not an image, a projection, not an image through a telescope, in what could be described as a tiny handheld camera obscura. The image on the screen, which you see on the right, exposed, is reversed left-right, but not inverted. And since the photographer is not seeing exactly what the film sees, a correction for parallax is also required. So just for those of you who have never seen one of these, so this, I'm sorry there's no film in it. Somebody suggested that if the film would have been a lot of fun to bring up all the lights and take a few pictures. So that's the lens that projects the image onto the film plate. This is the lens that the photographer sees when they open the box. And for focusing, flip open the little magnifying glass that you see here. The camera could also be aimed. That little panel here pops in, and it can be aimed like this. It can also be aimed. I can aim it like a conventional camera. But no photographer would do that. That's something you use for a sports event or moving subjects. You certainly wouldn't use it for the kind of subjects that Erickson was interested in. I'm not going to pass it around. I borrowed this from a friend. If anyone's interested in looking at it, we can look at it together afterwards. So, as I said, since the photographer, so parallax is also required. The other obvious difference, and these are a couple of images taken with that camera, but the other obvious difference between the twin lens reflex and the 35mm SLRs that some of you still use is that the photographer is looking down at the image on the screen and not directly at the subject at the moment when the shutter is released. For photographers like Diane Arbus, who also used the Mamiya twin lens reflex, this distancing from her subjects made her, she said, from the subject's point of view, less present in the room. For Erickson, I would say perhaps the opposite is true. The slightly more intricate process, the ritual associated with the capture of a single photograph and a handheld light meter. Sometimes you would walk with the meter to the subject to read the light incident on the subject and not bouncing off it. So the ritual associated with the capture of a single photograph may have connected him to the subject in a way that actually made him more present on the site. In his letter to Weber from Kyoto on June 11, Erickson makes a very interesting comment, something of a confession, about his own use of the camera for note-taking. He says, Katsura, I'm quoting, is far beyond all expectations and is misread, misrepresented in practically every coverage of it. So I shall do it again and contribute to the damage that publicity has brought to Japanese architecture. And he adds, for all photographs lie to a degree unique, I think, to Japanese architecture. The curatorial team, I'm getting now into the exhibition, a little more in detail about that. So the curatorial team, we asked ourselves, how do we do this? How do we translate? How do we make a selection? How do we translate the images that we picked? Do we project them? Do we print them? Do we put them on light tables? How do we communicate what we're learning about Erickson's use of photography and his site notes in the best way possible? And we finally agreed that the best way possible was to introduce the visitor. The best way to introduce the visitor to the exhibition would be via a series of what we call short stories that explore a sampling of the themes and ideas that run through the letters like different lengths and different colors of yarn. The short stories provide glimpses of the mass of photographs and writings that comprise what Francesco referred to as Erickson's travel diaries. No journal, but there are travel diaries. He photographed his subjects from multiple perspectives. He experimented with framing, point of view, and light, and he took advantage of the time for reflection and writing on site. The benefits of prolonged study on site, his words, are evident. The photographs illustrate his search for understanding, and they confirm what he saw when he looked down onto that ground glass plate. The site notes in the letters reveal what he was thinking and what he learned. There are 20 short stories in all. Each one combines a selection of the photographs that he took with excerpts from his letters and later publications. All of the photographs in the first series of 16 were taken by Erickson himself. The first 16 explore recurring themes such as materiality, spatial organization, building and landscape, the contrast between Western and Japanese concepts of the path or circulation in a building. Two more examples of the early versions of two other short stories. And these run like videos, but they're all based on Erickson's still images. The last four stories examine the impact of his travels on his design thinking, highlighting 4 houses that were completed within 5 years of the trip to Asia in 1961. They are the Dyed, Bales, Baldwin, and Smith II residences. Erickson's own accounts of these residences, of these houses, in the architectural press clearly draw on the ideas and even, in many instances, the language that he used in his letters and public talks to describe what he had learned in Japan. The photographs in this sequence are also by Erickson, with one exception, the Smith II residence. We were unable to find in any of our archives or in the family collection any photographs by Erickson of this iconic house. So we have used photographs for the Smith II house. We thought it was more important to include the house as one of the short stories than to stick to our rule about photos only by Erickson. So we used instead photographs by the professional John Fulker, who photographed many of Erickson's projects, which we obtained from the archives of the West Vancouver Art Museum. I'm close to the end to this little talk. The narratives of experience and discovery in Erickson's Asian travel diaries explore ideas that we felt follow their own kinds of itineraries. And some of the objects on the table in the room are associated with a caption that we call the itineraries of ideas. An afternoon spent struggling to understand the sense of harmony with nature in the garden of a tea house in Kyoto culminates in a revelation that's recorded on site in an improvised notebook, refined in a letter that evening to friends and family, and later developed as the theme of an article in a journal. Contemplation of the asymmetry of a column beam connection in a Japanese temple leads to design decisions about the wood structure of a house in a forest clearing in West Vancouver. Teaching and writing play crucial roles in the trajectory, in the itineraries of ideas, and architectural journals provide ideal opportunities for experimentation and discussion. Erickson taught at the University of Oregon in 1956 and at UBC from 1956 to 1965, retiring as an associate professor. And he was speaking and writing on a regular basis for a good part of his life. In the mid-1960s, the journal Canadian Architect published 2 insightful articles by Erickson about his experiences in Asia. The first, The Weight of Heaven, in March 1964, and the second, The Roots, in December 1966. And both of these journals are presented as objects on the table in the exhibition room. Both articles, I should say, express Erickson's admiration for the ability of contemporary architects like Kenzo Tange and Kunio Meikawa to work with but break through tradition. Erickson wrote a lot about the need for the best of Japan's contemporary architects to understand tradition to the point where they could actually move away from it, move what he would have characterized as forward. The articles also explore, or reveal, I should say, his own determination to reconcile what he had learned in Japan with what he was imagining as his own architectural trajectory. The articles also draw, sometimes literally, on the source material in the letters from Asia and Europe. The text in the red box from The Roots, December 66, is drawn directly from the letters and appears in some of the monographs. And I'll read it quickly. In Katsura, we find that the qualities that we have admired so far have reached a culminating point. No other building is such a forceful statement of the poetic idea. A building that penetrates beyond the world of substance and space, of accommodation and techniques, and with a superb and untrammeled eloquence enters the realm of poetry, of the spirit and of the senses, as perhaps no other building in existence. He was moved. Here, the disciplines that have often drained Japanese architecture of its vitality, those of sobriety, refinement, succinctness of feeling, frugality, conformity, the inclination for the transient, the incomplete, the taste for bitterness and melancholy, shibui, are all fused at Katsura in a composition of extraordinary character and strength. The strength is not physical, for the building hardly touches the ground, but it is in the intensity of feeling. He adds, from Japanese architecture, there is much that is unique for us to learn. The range of feeling, the manner of composition, the sensitivity to materials, and the awareness of surroundings. That last sentence is probably one of the fragments of text that appears most frequently in citations of his work and in his own writings and publications. The title of the March 64 article, The Weight of Heaven, appears in the text as a poetic reference to the Japanese roof. So once again, I'm going to read from the text. The act of citing betrays to us the tenor of human aspirations. So much is expressed in how the Hellenes set their temples against the sky on a high pavement in a high city, a jewel flattering the earth, how the palaces of the French monarchs imposed their patterns for miles about on nature and town alike, how the Gothic spires seemed to draw the whole village in its wake to reach the sky, how the Japanese temple accepts with graceful resignation the weight of heaven on its roof, how right proclaimed a love of nature above the love of man, how the Italian church looks at a place isolated in nature and at ease in the gregariousness of the town. We were curious in the curatorial meetings about the origin of this metaphor, the weight of heaven. We found nothing in the letters that provided any clues, but Erickson provides a clue himself in the reference that I just read to Frank Lloyd Wright, who had visited Japan in 1905. In his 1945 autobiography, in the chapter titled A Song to Heaven, Wright wrote, and I quote, "But the truth is, the Japanese dwelling is in every bone and fiber of its structure honest, and our dwellings are not honest. Why are we so busy elaborately trying to get earth to heaven instead of seeing the simple Shinto wisdom of sensibly getting heaven decently to earth?" So we think that's where the metaphor came from. Wright's influence on Erickson is well known. In a 1999 interview with CBC journalist Shelley Pomerantz, Erickson shares the following reflection. He says, I think two of the aspects of my work that I really owe to him, i.e. Wright, are the response to sight, and he adds in parenthesis, and that I only discovered when I visited his work, not from photographs. You never learn anything from photographs, close parenthesis. And the other was the use of materials. A few minutes later in the same interview, he adds, most of Wright's lessons he learned in Japan. When I went to Japan, I found the source of his inspiration. Okay, this is going to take another 15 minutes. There are many people to thank for their support in an exercise like this. I have to admit that at the beginning of this adventure, I seriously underestimated the work that it would require, the number of people who would be involved, and the time that it needed. I will start by thanking the CCA, Phyllis Lambert, Giovanni Borassi, and Francesco Garuti, for their friendship and support throughout this time. And I want to thank them also for the opportunity to actually do what I'm doing. It's an experience that for me has been somewhat transformative. Laura Aparicio Llorente, my co-curator, for her knowledge, insight, and patience with me. Those phone calls at 4 in the morning, it was 4 in the morning for me because I was in Singapore, and it was 4 in the afternoon for her because she was here. Who had the better of that conversation? I thank also the curatorial team of interns, Kea Mosignane, Ella Esslinger and Leonie Hartung for their passion and commitment to the project. The design development team of Sébastien Larivière and Anne Truong, who have performed wonders, much of it in the last week or so. You can't imagine what that room looked like yesterday. The outstanding installation team of Michael Eddy, Catherine Labonté, Chris Lloyd, Colin Liers, Rix de Boer, and Alison Deroy, who I'm told pulls everything together and keeps everybody on schedule. Alan Reed, digitization and processing, and Sean Yendris, graphic design. My colleagues on the board of the Arthur Erickson Foundation and the Erickson family, Emily, Jeffrey, and Chris, who deserve special recognition for their continuing support of the exhibition and all of our work with their uncle's legacy. Many of the images that you will see on the walls in the exhibition room are on loan from the family. Also deserving a special thanks are Jennifer Garland and her team, many of whom are here tonight, in the John Bland Canadian Architecture Collection at McGill. Jennifer and her team were instrumental in recovering the Weber correspondence, and much more. I would also like to thank Max Amarongan of the film company, Sticks and Stones, for his assistance with the archival materials related to the Dyed House, as well as my friends George Hughes, a designer based in Toronto, for his insight regarding the use of the twin lens reflex camera, and Gavin Drummond, Montreal, for sharing his own readings and research on photography, the reference to Diane Arbus, for example, and for lending us this wonderful camera that I brought with me this evening. So this comes from Gavin's collection. Finally, to my students and colleagues at McGill, who've been wondering where I've been hiding for the last, I won't say how long. I will be back, and I will make it up. Thank you very much.
This obviously wants to be a book. Any plans?
Yes, there were plans. That's how the project started. The project started with a proposal to, yes, Phyllis? No, I just want to okay. The project started with a proposal to the Erickson family to work, to collaborate on a publication about the early travels, but they're presently very occupied in a publication of their uncle's memoirs, which is coming out, I think, in the coming months. So we all agreed to postpone. And in the interim, without access to very much of the correspondence from Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa, we discovered, almost by accident, or rediscovered the archives of the Weber letters here at McGill. And it was thanks to Jennifer that we were able to actually launch the project. So it's on the basis of that discovery that we went ahead. And yes, there will be publications. Yeah. Phyllis.
Okay, what I wanted to say is that You know, it was only after Mies was dead for about 10 years, I think, that anything came out on him. That's when I did an exhibition here at the CCA, and Barry Bergdahl did one at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. And why that was, because I think it was more than 10 years, the problem was the material, the sources. And although the Museum of Modern Art had a fantastic collection, and also there were other in Chicago, University of Chicago also did. It takes time to do this. There's a real problem here, and that is that nobody has really done very much with the archives. We have done one little show here, that was all. And the much of the material is still in the hands of the family. And until that really becomes into archives, public archives, where the material can be read and looked at carefully, it'll take some time again before we can really publish work. This is a marvelous day, David. Thank you for this tremendous look at the work, and I've learned a lot in it.
It's a team, they're all in the room.
Yes, I know the team is great, but it needed somebody to do it, okay? It needed somebody to activate it, because the team has been here, okay? Thank you. No, I don't want to, I think the CCA is fantastic, and their way of putting things together and doing things, but it needs people, scholars, who are going to do this, and to do it. So because of Arthur Erickson's 100th birthday, there was quite a big foundation, really, and the family really made efforts to do quite a lot of things. But I think it's so important to be able to have the material to work with. I mean, none of this has been put together before. So thank you very much. And I just want to say again, it's very important to have finally the documents, whether it's at the CCA or someplace else, or one of the other two places. Is not the point. The point is that it be somewhere where people can really deal with the information.
Couldn't agree more.
I think we can finish on those words. Thank you very much, David. Merci à tous.